Midday. The sun hung high above the city, casting sharp shadows across the pavement. Traffic rolled steadily down the street, engines humming, horns distant but constant. People moved in every direction. Office workers on lunch break, tourists, with shopping bags, a couple arguing softly near the corner. Outside a small neighborhood coffee shop stood Keanu Reeves. No bodyguards, no security detail, no spotlight. Just a worn leather jacket, dark jeans, and scuffed boots that had clearly seen years of use. He stood calmly near the entrance, one hand loosely holding a paper coffee cup, the other resting casually at his side. His posture was relaxed, balanced, unbothered. Across the street, 3 motorcycles turned the corner. The sound came first. Deep, aggressive, loud enough to cut through the city noise. Heads turned. The bikes rolled to a stop near the curb, engines rumbling like a warning. Chrome reflected the sunlight. Heavy tires pressed into the asphalt. 3 bikers. Leather vests, thick boots, chains hanging from denim. Confidence bordering on arrogance. One of them removed his helmet slowly, shaking out his hair. His eyes scanned the sidewalk until they landed on Keanu. They approached without hesitation. Pedestrians subtly stepped aside. Conversations quieted. The atmosphere shifted from normal to tense in seconds. The lead biker walked directly up to Keanu and stopped inches away. "You got a problem staring?" he asked, voice low but sharp. Without waiting for a response, he grabbed Keanu's shoulder, not violently, but deliberately. A territorial move, a public test. The world seemed to narrow. Nearby, customers froze mid-sip. A barista inside the cafe stopped wiping the counter. Someone across the street instinctively slowed down, watching. Keanu didn't react. No jerk, no anger, no fear. Just steady breathing, steady eye contact. The biker tightened his grip slightly, expecting resistance, expecting ego, expecting confrontation. Instead, he found stillness. And sometimes, stillness is more unsettling than aggression. The street, moments ago alive with noise and movement, now felt suspended, like everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. 3 bikers, 1 man, broad daylight, and a decision hanging in the air. From a distance, the situation looked simple. 3 large men in leather vests, 1 quiet man standing alone. Power imbalance. At least that's what the crowd believed. The midday sun reflected off storefront windows, casting bright light across the sidewalk. People pretended not to stare, but their attention was locked in. A delivery driver paused beside his van. 2 college students slowed their steps. Even drivers at the red light leaned slightly forward in their seats. Everyone saw the same thing: intimidation. The lead biker kept his hand on Keanu's shoulder a second longer than necessary. It wasn't about pain. It was about dominance, territory. Establishing control in front of an audience. His friends stood just behind him, forming a loose half-circle. Close enough to block space. Far enough to watch the show. They were used to this. Loud entrances, public pressure. People backing down quickly. That's how street dominance works. It feeds on reaction. But Keanu didn't give them one. He didn't shrug the hand off. He didn't step back. He didn't raise his voice. He simply observed. His eyes moved calmly, not nervously, but deliberately. He wasn't looking at faces. He was looking at posture, weight distribution, distance between feet positioning. The lead biker stood heavy on his front leg, too forward, too confident. The second one shifted constantly. Restless energy, unstable. The third stayed slightly behind, scanning the crowd more than Keanu. Keanu registered it all without appearing to. Years of training had taught him something most people never learn. The fight is decided before the first move. Breathing stayed steady, shoulders relaxed, feet angled just slightly, subtle enough that no one would notice but positioned for balance. The biker mistook the calm for submission. "Shambai, cool. Got your tongue?" he said, smirking. A few nervous laughs came from his friends. Still nothing from Keanu. Inside the cafe, someone whispered, "Is that?" Another voice responded, "No way." But doubt lingered, because the man standing there didn't look like a threat. He looked ordinary. That's what made it dangerous. People often assume strength announces itself. It doesn't. Real discipline hides in plain sight. The lead biker leaned closer, invading personal space intentionally. The smell of gasoline and leather mixed with coffee from the shop behind them. "You think you're tough?" he pressed. Keanu's expression didn't change, not cold, not angry, just aware. There was no ego in his posture. No need to prove anything. That's what unsettles aggressive people the most, when intimidation fails to produce fear. A car alarm chirped somewhere down the block. A bus roared past, briefly breaking the tension with mechanical noise. But the circle on the sidewalk remained locked in silence. The bikers expected escalation. They expected a flinch, a pushback, a heated word exchange. Because chaos is where they feel strongest. But Keanu operated differently. Control over reaction, control over breathing, control over space. He wasn't thinking about pride. He was thinking about consequences, crowd density, potential collateral damage. Police response. Time in a busy area, he didn't look trapped. He looked patient. The second biker shifted closer, cracking his knuckles dramatically. "Say something," he taunted. Stillness again. The longer it stretched, the more the energy flipped. At first, the crowd saw three aggressors overpowering one man. Now, they saw something else. Three men trying to provoke a reaction, and failing. The psychological balance began to tilt. The lead biker tightened his grip again, trying to reclaim control of the moment. Public dominance depends on momentum, and momentum was slipping. Keanu finally moved, but only slightly. His hand rose slowly, not to strike, just to remove the biker's hand from his shoulder. Not aggressive, not rushed, precise. That tiny action said more than any threat could. It wasn't rejection, it was boundary. The bikers exchanged a quick glance. This wasn't going the way they planned. Crowd phones were now clearly visible. Cameras raised. Record buttons tapped quietly. What started as a random intimidation moment was becoming a public spectacle, and the one person who seemed least concerned about that fact was the man being surrounded. Calm isn't weakness. Silence isn't fear. Sometimes, it's assessment. The street held its breath because something had shifted, and everyone felt it. Have you ever noticed how people treat you when they think you're powerless? And what happens when they realize they were wrong? The moment Keanu calmly removed the biker's hand from his shoulder, something subtle but powerful changed. Not in volume, in energy. The lead biker looked down at his own hand for a split second, as if confused that someone had dared to move it without force, without panic. It wasn't the act itself that bothered him. It was how easily it had been done. No struggle, no hostility, no performance, just a quiet refusal. And in public confrontations, ego hates quiet refusal. The biker smirked, but it was thinner now, forced. "Oh, we got a tough guy," he said loudly, making sure the crowd could hear. His friends chuckled on cue, stepping a little closer to tighten the circle. Boots scraped lightly against pavement. Leather creaked as shoulders rolled back. They were trying to rebuild the moment, reclaim control, because dominance depends on appearance, and right now, appearance was slipping. Keanu didn't step back. He didn't step forward either. He simply adjusted his stance, barely noticeable to anyone who wasn't trained to see it. One foot angled slightly outward, weight evenly distributed, hands relaxed at his sides. He wasn't preparing to attack. He was preparing to respond. The second biker leaned in from the side, invading space deliberately. "Apologize," he said. "You were staring." There was no accusation in Keanu's eyes. No guilt, no fear. Just steady contact. The crowd grew thicker. Someone whispered again, That looks like Keanu Reeves. But uncertainty kept anyone from intervening. The lead biker's jaw tightened. He wasn't getting what he wanted. No flinch. No verbal argument. No shove. Just stillness. And stillness makes aggressive people uncomfortable. Say something, he demanded, giving Keanu a small push in the chest. Not hard enough to injure, just enough to test boundaries, publicly. Keanu absorbed it without stumbling. No reactive tension. That was the problem. The biker wasn't dealing with resistance. He was dealing with control. A bead of sweat rolled down the biker's temple. Whether from the sun or rising frustration, it wasn't clear. He stepped closer again. Now they were inches apart. The other two spread slightly wider, making the space feel tighter for anyone. Inside it. A phone camera moved closer. A car slowed at the curb. Inside the cafe, someone pressed their face to the glass. The lead biker spoke again, lower this time. You think you're better than us? That question wasn't about staring anymore. It was about pride. Keanu's breathing stayed slow, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Measured. He could feel the weight distribution of the man in front of him. Heavy on the front foot. Shoulders leaning in, center of gravity exposed. The second biker shifted again, restless, feeding off tension. The third one scanned the crowd nervously now. Because something about this didn't feel normal. Usually by now the target would have cracked. Backed away. Argued. Shoved back. But this man hadn't done any of it. The lead biker laughed suddenly, louder than necessary. Look at you, standing there like you're some kind of hero. The laugh echoed awkwardly. No one in the crowd joined. The sun beat down harder, the smell of asphalt mixed with exhaust fumes from idling motorcycles. The leader's patience thinned. He shoved Keanu again, harder this time. This one carried more intent. It wasn't playful anymore. It was escalation. Keanu took one controlled step back, not from fear, but to reset distance. And that step changed everything. Because now the biker had committed weight forward. Momentum had begun. And aggression without discipline is predictable. The crowd felt it. The atmosphere tightened. The second biker muttered, "Just drop him," under his breath. But the leader wanted spectacle. He wanted a reaction big enough to restore dominance. He drew his arm back slightly. Not a full swing. Not yet. But enough to threaten one. And in that half-second pause, that thin line between intimidation and violence, time seemed to slow. Keanu's eyes tracked the shoulder rotation, the slight tightening of the forearm, the shift of the front foot. He had seen it thousands of times in training, overcommitment, emotion-driven movement. The leader leaned forward again, voice raised. You gonna keep pretending you're not scared? The words echoed louder than intended, because the street was completely silent now. Everyone watching, waiting. The bikers believed they were in control, but control isn't about volume. It's about stability. And right now, only one person in that circle looked stable. Keanu stood centered, balanced, present, not angry, not afraid, just ready. The leader made his decision, and the next move would determine everything. The decision happened in a fraction of a second. The lead biker's shoulder rotated first, then his elbow lifted, then his fist came forward, fast, heavy, fueled by ego more than precision. It wasn't a trained strike. It was emotional, and emotional movements are predictable. Before the punch fully extended, Keanu moved, not backward, not forward, sideways. A subtle step off the line of attack, barely 6 inches, but enough to let the force pass through empty space instead of impact. The biker's fist cut through air. Momentum carried his upper body forward. And in that exact moment, Keanu's hand connected, not to strike, but to control. He caught the attacking wrist cleanly, thumb aligned with the joint, fingers wrapping precisely where leverage mattered most. No wasted motion, no flourish, just structure. The crowd gasped. The biker tried to retract his arm, but he couldn't. Keanu rotated his hips slightly, not visibly dramatic, just enough to shift power from arm strength to full body alignment. The wrist turned, the elbow followed, The shoulder locked. Balance disappeared. It looked almost gentle, but it wasn't. The biker's knees buckled as his center of gravity collapsed forward. Keanu guided the motion downward, controlled, calculated, redirecting force instead of fighting it. Within a second, the biker was on the pavement. Flat. Air knocked from his lungs. Not unconscious, not bloodied, just completely neutralized. The entire movement had taken less than 2 seconds. Silence swallowed the street. No dramatic punches, no wild flailing, just physics and precision. Keanu stepped back immediately. He didn't follow the biker down, didn't add another strike, didn't escalate. He released the wrist the moment control was achieved and created distance again. Because control isn't about domination. It's about ending threat. The second, biker froze mid-step. His aggressive posture dissolved into hesitation. He looked from his fallen friend to Keanu, confusion written across his face. That wasn't luck. That wasn't random. That was training. The third biker instinctively took half a step backward. For the first time, their triangle formation broke. The psychological advantage shattered. The leader groaned, trying to push himself up. But as he shifted weight onto his arm, pain shot through his wrist, forcing him back down. Not broken, just compromised. Keanu's stance stayed relaxed. Hands open, breathing steady. He wasn't chasing anyone, he wasn't posturing, he wasn't even speaking. And that silence was heavier now. The crowd reacted in waves. A sharp inhale, a few stunned whispers. Someone muttered, "Did you see that?" Phones were raised higher now. The narrative had flipped instantly. Moments ago, 3 bikers surrounded a quiet man. Now one of them was on the ground, and the other 2 didn't know what to do. The second biker clenched his fists, but didn't move. Because he had just watched something unfamiliar. Efficiency. There had been no anger in it. No rage. No street brawl chaos. Just clean mechanics. The kind you only develop through discipline. The leader finally rolled onto his side, clutching his wrist. Pride shattered louder than any bone could have been. He looked up, expecting gloating. He found composure. Keanu met his eyes. Not with hatred, not with satisfaction. Just calm, acknowledgement. A silent message. You made the choice. The 2 standing bikers exchanged glances. Their confidence had been built on intimidation, but intimidation collapses when it meets competence. The second biker took a cautious step forward. Testing. Keanu shifted his weight slightly. Not threatening, just prepared. That was enough. Because now they understood. This wasn't someone reacting emotionally. This was someone trained to respond. The sirens in the distance began faintly. Not yet close, but present. Reality returning. The crowd widened the circle instinctively, creating more space between the bikers and the man they had tried to corner. Power had inverted, not through aggression, through discipline. The leader forced himself to sit up slowly, glaring, but without the earlier fire. His breathing was heavier now, uncertain. The second biker leaned down toward him. "Let's go," he muttered under his breath. It wasn't submission, but it wasn't dominance either. Keanu remained still, watching, assessing. He didn't press advantage, didn't lecture, didn't threaten. Because once control is established, further force becomes ego. And ego is what started this. The leader staggered to his feet with help. His wrist hung slightly stiff at his side. His eyes avoided direct contact now. The motorcycles that had roared in minutes earlier suddenly felt less powerful. Engines revved again, but the sound didn't carry the same weight. It sounded defensive, not dominant. Keanu stepped aside calmly, giving them a clear path. No blocking, no pursuit. The crowd parted. The bikers mounted up quickly. No final insults, no threats, just retreat. As the engines roared away down the sunlit street, the noise faded into distance, and the silence that remained carried a different kind of power. Not chaos, not fear, respect. The shift had happened. For a few seconds after the motorcycles roared away, no one moved. The street felt suspended between what had just happened and what it meant. The crowd slowly began to breathe again. Conversations restarted in low murmurs, phones lowered, but not completely, because something else was unfolding now. The fallen leader, helped onto his bike before leaving, hadn't looked defeated physically. He looked exposed, and exposure is heavier than pain. A college student near the cafe finally said it out loud. Was that Keanu Reeves? The name traveled through the crowd like a ripple. Heads turned back toward him. Recognition began forming piece by piece. The posture, the face, the calm. Whispers multiplied. I think it is. No way. It has to be. Keanu didn't react to the speculation. He simply bent down, picked up his coffee cup, which had somehow remained upright through the entire confrontation, and checked the lid. Still intact, still calm. That detail alone unsettled people more than the takedown. He hadn't even spilled his drink. A middle-aged man stepped forward slightly. "Sir, are you okay?" Keanu gave a small nod. "I'm fine." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. There was no adrenaline shaking in it, no breathlessness, just normalcy, as if what had happened was a minor inconvenience, not a public altercation. Two teenagers approached cautiously. "Dude, that was insane," one of them said under his breath. Keanu gave a faint half smile, not proud, not dismissive, just polite. Across the street, someone replayed a video on their phone. The clip was already spreading. You could see it clearly. The swing, the sidestep, the control, the fall. No wasted movement, no extra violence, just efficiency. That's when the realization deepened. This wasn't random strength. This wasn't street luck. This was discipline. The barista stepped outside from the cafe, wiping her hands nervously on her apron. "Sir, do you want another coffee? On the house." Keanu shook his head gently. "This one's fine." Again, no ego, no basking in attention. The crowd's perspective shifted completely. Minutes ago, they saw a man being cornered. Now they saw something else. Restraint. He could have continued. He could have embarrassed them further. He could have escalated when the second biker hesitated. He didn't. That choice mattered more than the takedown, because power without control becomes chaos, and he had chosen control. A man near the curb said quietly to his friend, "They picked the wrong guy." But it wasn't about picking the wrong guy. It was about misjudging character. The bikers had seen clothes, silence, stillness. They interpreted that as weakness. But stillness isn't weakness. It's confidence that doesn't need noise. One woman, still holding her phone, asked cautiously, "Why didn't you hit him? Again?" Keanu looked at her briefly. He stopped being a threat. Simple. No lecture, no philosophy, just truth. The words settled into the crowd heavier than any dramatic speech could have. The sirens that had echoed earlier grew closer now. Police vehicles turned the corner slowly, responding to multiple calls. The flashing lights reflected against shop windows and chrome surfaces. Officers stepped out quickly but cautiously. "What happened here?" one asked, scanning faces. Several people spoke at once. They started it. They surrounded him. He defended himself. Phones were shown. Videos replayed. The narrative was clear. The officers approached Keanu. "Sir, are you injured?" "No." "Do you wish to press charges?" He paused briefly. Not because he was unsure, but because he was measuring the weight of the decision. Pressing charges would escalate things legally. Humiliation had already done most of the work. He shook his head, slightly. "No." The officer studied him for a moment, then nodded. "If you change your mind, contact us." Keanu thanked him quietly. The police gathered statements from witnesses as the crowd slowly thinned. Normal life resumed in fragments. Cars moved again. People returned to conversations. The cafe door opened and closed repeatedly. But the energy had changed. The story would travel, not as a celebrity beat up bikers, but as something deeper. 3 men attempted to assert dominance. 1 man asserted control. Without shouting, without rage, without spectacle. A young man who had watched everything turned to his friend and said, "That's what real confidence looks like." And that might have been the most accurate description of the entire moment. Keanu took one final look down the street where the motorcycles had disappeared. No anger, no triumph, just acknowledgement. Then he turned back toward the cafe entrance, blending, again into the ordinary rhythm of the afternoon. The crowd had learned something. The bikers had learned something harder. And the street, though noisy once more, would never feel quite the same to those who witnessed how quickly arrogance collapses when it collides with discipline. The police presence lingered for several minutes, long enough for statements to be taken and videos reviewed. The flashing lights that had once intensified the scene now faded into the background as officers finished documenting what happened. Keanu stood calmly near the curb, coffee still in hand, posture unchanged. No pacing. No animated storytelling. No attempt to justify himself. He answered questions directly, short, clear, measured. Witnesses repeated the same version of events. They approached him. They grabbed him first. He didn't escalate. He defended himself. The consistency mattered, because public confrontations often blur into conflicting narratives. But this one was clean. Simple. Observable. An officer stepped closer once more. "Sir, you're sure you don't want to press charges?" It wasn't asked casually, it was procedural. Keanu looked down the street again, the direction the motorcycles had disappeared. He replayed the sequence in his mind, the grip, the shove, the swing, then the fall, the humiliation. For men like that, public embarrassment cuts deeper than fines. "No," he said again, "it's handled." The officer studied him carefully, as if expecting anger beneath the calm. There was none. Just decision. That answer shifted the tone of the entire aftermath, because now the event wasn't about punishment. It was about consequence, and consequence had already arrived. As the police vehicles pulled away, the crowd finally began to disperse for real. Some people lingered at a distance, whispering and replaying clips on their screens. Others returned to their routines, glancing back occasionally as if unsure whether the moment had truly ended. The barista stepped outside again. "You sure you're okay?" Keanu nodded lightly. "I'm good." She hesitated. They were out of line. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked around at the street, now returning to its normal rhythm. Cars passing, doors opening, conversations restarting. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "people test boundaries to see what they can get away with." She frowned slightly. And sometimes they learn. That was it. No moral lecture, no self-congratulation, just acknowledgement of reality. Across the sidewalk, 2 men who had recorded the entire event approached cautiously. "Hey," one of them said. "That was seriously impressive." Keanu offered a small nod of appreciation, but his expression remained neutral. "It didn't need to happen," he replied. That line carried weight because it revealed something important. The confrontation wasn't a victory to him. It was a failure of respect. He hadn't wanted a fight. He had managed one. That distinction separates ego from discipline. A teenage boy stepped forward next. "Were you scared?" The question hung in the air, honest and unfiltered. Keanu looked at him thoughtfully. "Fear isn't the problem," he said. "Losing control is." The boy absorbed that silently, a lesson delivered without preaching. The sun shifted slightly in the sky, casting longer shadows across the pavement. The energy of the street had softened now, but the memory of what happened still hovered. Keanu took a slow sip of his coffee, Still warm, still steady. He didn't scan the area for recognition. He didn't check social media. He didn't look for validation. Because validation wasn't the point. Control was. A delivery truck driver walked past and muttered under his breath, handled that like a professional. Keanu didn't react. Professional wasn't the goal either. Necessary was. He began walking slowly toward the cafe entrance again. Not to hide, not to escape, just to continue his day. That choice mattered, because many people after a public display of dominance would linger, soak in attention, relive the moment, tell the story loudly. He did none of that. He didn't need to prove anything. The final decision wasn't about charges. It wasn't about police involvement. It was about restraint. He could have escalated when the second biker hesitated. He could have pressed forward when the leader fell. He could have turned the crowd into an audience. He chose not to. That's real control. Not the ability to overpower, but the ability to stop. As he reached the cafe door, someone called, out from behind, "Hey, you really let them go?" Keanu paused briefly. Without turning fully, he answered, "They'll remember." And that was enough. Because humiliation, especially public humiliation, reshapes behavior faster than punishment ever could. The engines had roared in with arrogance. They had left with silence. That silence would sit heavier on them than any fine. Keanu pushed the cafe door open. The bell chimed softly above it. Inside, the normal world continued. Orders being called out. Milk steaming. Cash register opening and closing. The street outside carried on too. But everyone who witnessed that moment walked away with something different. A recalibration of what strength actually looks like. Not volume, not size, not intimidation, control, and sometimes the strongest decision in a confrontation is knowing exactly when to end it. By late afternoon, the street had almost completely returned to normal. Traffic flowed steadily again. Conversations blended into background noise. The cafe resumed its usual rhythm. Orders being called out, chairs scraping. Lightly across the floor, customers scrolling on their phones as if nothing unusual had happened. But for those who witnessed it, the air still carried the memory. Moments like that don't just disappear. They settle. They replay. They teach. Inside the cafe, a quiet conversation had formed around one central theme. Not how hard the biker fell, not how fast it happened, but how controlled it was. That could have gotten ugly, someone said softly. It didn't, another replied. That distinction mattered. Keanu sat near the window now, coffee in front of him, posture relaxed as it had been before everything started. If someone walked in at that moment, they would never guess what had unfolded minutes earlier. No dramatic retelling, no animated gestures, just stillness. Outside, a small group lingered on the sidewalk, still discussing it. They thought he was an easy target. They misread him. They misread the situation. But what they truly misread was character. There's a certain type of confidence that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't scan for attention. It doesn't react emotionally to challenge. It waits, and when necessary, it moves. That was the lesson people were processing without even realizing it. A young man who had recorded the incident replayed the clip again with a friend. "Look at this," he whispered. He steps aside before the punch even lands. It's like he knew. His friend nodded. He wasn't angry. Exactly. Anger makes people sloppy. Discipline makes people precise. The bikers had arrived with noise, engines revving, boots heavy, voices loud. They relied on presence, but presence without control collapses the moment it's tested. What unfolded on that sidewalk wasn't a fight. It was a demonstration, not of violence, of restraint. The barista glanced toward Keanu, once more. There was something grounding about the way he had returned to normal life so quickly, as if the confrontation had been nothing more than a brief interruption. He finished his coffee slowly. No rush. No urgency, because there was no emotional residue left behind. He hadn't carried anger into the cafe with him. He hadn't carried pride either, just awareness. Outside, a middle-aged man turned to his teenage son. "Remember that?" he said quietly. "Remember what?" "The way he handled it." The son nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. Strength isn't about who throws the hardest punch. It's about who doesn't need to throw one twice. The motorcycles were long gone now, but the image of them retreating lingered. Arrogance rarely expects resistance, and when resistance comes calmly, it shakes foundations. Keanu stood up, tossed his empty cup into the trash, and adjusted his jacket. No applause followed him, no dramatic exit. Just the soft chime of the cafe door as he stepped back onto the sidewalk. The same sidewalk where, less than an hour earlier, 3 men had attempted to dominate him publicly. Now it was just another afternoon. He walked down the street at an unhurried pace, blending again into the flow of pedestrians. A passerby who recognized him offered a subtle nod of respect. He returned it, no more. No less, because respect doesn't demand spotlight. It acknowledges quietly. The true resolution of the moment wasn't the takedown. It wasn't the police arriving. It wasn't the crowd filming. It was the decision to walk away without escalation, to let humiliation teach instead of revenge punish, to demonstrate that calm is not weakness, and that discipline is louder than aggression, even in silence. The street would forget the exact details over time. The date, the time, the exact words spoken. But the lesson would stay. Never mistake quiet for vulnerable. Never confuse humility with helplessness, and never assume that the calmest person in the room isn't the most capable, because real power doesn't chase conflict. It controls it, and when it's finished, it simply walks away.